I still dream about the eyes. Most people talk about evil when they recount stories like this. They talk about a malevolent glare or a predatory hunger, the kind of look a wolf gives a deer before the hamstring snaps. But this was not that. Evil is a human concept. It implies intent, passion, a desire to cause harm. What I saw standing outside my tent that night did not have intent. It did not have passion. The eyes were glass. They were flat, milky, and utterly devoid of the spark that separates a living thing from a taxidermy mount. They reminded me of this porcelain doll my ex-wife, Sarah, used to keep on the mantel of our living room in Chicago. I hated that thing. It had these blue, dead eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. That's what I was looking at in the middle of the Superior National Forest. Not a man, not an animal, just a vessel, a biological casing that had been hollowed out and was being worn by something that did not know how to operate the controls. I am an engineer by trade, structural, specifically. My entire life is built on the physics of load-bearing walls, tensile strength, and material fatigue. If a bridge collapses, there is a reason. If a building sways, there is a mathematical explanation. I do not believe in ghosts. I do not believe in cryptids. I believe in gravity, friction, and the undeniable reality of concrete. But that night, the math did not add up. To understand why I froze, why I did not just grab my hatchet and scream, you have to understand the silence. You have to understand the absolute, suffocating isolation of the boundary waters in late October. And to understand that, we have to go back to the drive. Back to when I still thought this was just a vacation. I left Chicago at 4:00 a.m. on a Thursday. The city was still asleep, that grayscale hour where the streetlights hum and the steam rises from the manholes like breath from a sleeping giant. I threw my gear into the bed of my 2018 Ford F-150, the metallic clunk of the tailgate shutting echoing off the brick facade of my apartment building. I remember checking the tie-downs on the tonneau cover 3 times. OCD? Maybe. Or maybe just the habits of a man whose job requires double-checking every rivet on a suspension bridge. I needed this trip. God, I needed it. The last 18 months had been a slow-motion car crash. First, the divorce. Sarah left in May, taking the dog and the good furniture, leaving me with the mortgage and that damn porcelain doll she forgot on the mantel. Then came the audit at the firm. We were cleared, obviously, but the stress of having federal regulators combing through 10 years of my blueprints had left my nerves frayed. My doctor told me my cortisol levels were catastrophic. He prescribed Lexapro. I prescribed myself 4 days of solitude in northern Minnesota. I hit I-90 West, watching the sun bleed up over the horizon in my rearview mirror. I had an oversized Yeti tumbler filled with black coffee, Petus Major Dickinsonus blend, brewed strong enough to strip paint, and a bag of Jack Link's teriyaki beef jerky on the passenger seat. The drive is a long, flat blur of cornfields and billboards until you hit Wisconsin. I spent the first 3 hours listening to a podcast about the fall of the Roman Empire, letting the drone of the narrator's voice mix with the hum of the all-terrain tires on the asphalt. The cabin of the truck smelled like old leather and the faint, chemical scent of the new car little tree air freshener hanging from the mirror, though it was 3 years old and mostly just cardboard now. By the time I crossed into Minnesota, the landscape had changed. The flat farmland buckled into rolling hills, and the deciduous trees gave way to the jagged, dark green teeth of pine forests. I stopped for gas in Duluth around noon. The temperature had already dropped 20 degrees since Chicago. It was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. I stood at the pump, filling the tank, watching my breath cloud in the air. The wind coming off Lake Superior had a metallic taste to it, like cold iron and dead fish. I grabbed a sandwich from the deli inside, a sad-looking turkey on rye that tasted mostly of mayonnaise and refrigeration, and texted my sister. Heading into the dead zone. No cell service for 4 days. If I am not back by Monday night, tell the firm to check the blueprints for the Kensington project. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a "do not get eaten by a bear." I laughed. A bear. I was prepared for bears. I had a canister of counter-assault bear spray holstered to my hip belt and a bear-proof canister for my food. Bears are biological. They follow rules. They want food, they want territory, they want to protect their cubs. You can predict a bear. I got back in the truck and turned off the podcast. I wanted music for the final stretch. I put on Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. The acoustic guitar intro of the title track filled the cab as I turned off the highway and onto County Road 16, heading deep into the Superior National Forest. The pavement eventually gave way to gravel. The Ford bounced over the washboard surface, the suspension groaning rhythmically. Dust billowed out behind me, coating the rear window in a fine, gray powder. I drove for another hour, deeper and deeper into the trees. The bars on my iPhone 13 flickered from LTE to 3G, then to 1X, and finally to that ominous no service. I felt a knot of anxiety loosen in my chest. This was it. No emails asking about load coefficients. No texts from Sarah's lawyer about the equity split. Just the trees, the sky, and the gravel. I reached the trailhead at 3:30 p.m. It was not much of a trailhead, just a widened patch of dirt off a logging road with a rusted metal sign that read, Sioux Hustler Trail. There was no one else there. No other cars. No campers. Just the wind hissing through the tops of the red pines. I killed the engine. The silence that rushed in to replace the V6 rumble was heavy, pressed against my eardrums. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of the cooling engine block was the only noise for miles. I stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of decomposing leaves, pine resin, and damp earth. It was the smell of something ancient. I stretched my back, hearing a satisfying pop in my lumbar region, and walked around to the tailgate. It took me 20 minutes to gear up. I am meticulous about my pack weight. My Osprey Atmos 65 was packed with military precision. Sleeping bag, rated to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, at the bottom. Tent poles strapped to the side. Food canister in the center for weight distribution. I checked my laces, Merrill Moabs, double knotted. I checked my pockets, Swiss Army knife, compass, map. I locked the truck. I hid the keys inside the rear bumper, magnet locked in a small box, just in case I lost my pack. I took one last look at the vehicle, a shining blue artifact of civilization against the wall of green and brown. See you Monday, I whispered. I turned and walked into the tree line. The plan was simple. Hike in about 6 miles to a specific ridge overlooking a small, unnamed lake I spotted on the topographical map. Set up base camp. Spend 2 days fishing and reading. Hike out. The first hour was pure bliss. My legs burned in that good, athletic way as I climbed the initial incline. The trail was covered in a carpet of golden aspen leaves, slick with the morning's frost that had not quite melted in the shade. The light was filtering through the canopy in those sharp, slanted God rays, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I was making good time, about 5 miles an hour. My mind started to drift, categorizing the structural integrity of the forest. That oak leans at a 15-degree angle. Root system likely compromised by the stream erosion. That granite outcrop, sedimentary layering millions of years of pressure. It was how I calmed myself. Analyzing the world made it manageable. Around 5:30 p.m., the sun began to dip below the tree line. The temperature plummeted instantly. It went from a crisp 45 degrees to a biting 35 within minutes. I stopped to put on my fleece mid-layer, a Patagonia R1 pullover I'd had for 10 years. The fabric was pilled and worn, but it held heat like a furnace. That was when I first felt it. I was zipping up the fleece, my chin tucked into my chest, when the woods went silent. Not the quiet of the trailhead, that was just the absence of machines. This was the absence of life. The squirrels stopped chattering. The wind seemed to die in the branches. Even the dry leaves under my boots seemed to stop crunching, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I looked up, scanning the perimeter. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded flat, absorbed instantly by the density of the pines. Rationalize. Predator response. When a hawk flies over, the forest goes quiet. Or maybe a coyote. Dusk. That when the hunters wake up. I kept walking, but my pace increased. The beautiful solitude suddenly felt like exposure. I found myself checking behind me every 50 yards. My brain played tricks on me. Patterns in the bark looking like faces, a swaying branch looking like a waving arm. Pareidolia, I told myself. The human brain's evolutionary hardwiring to find patterns where none exist. A survival mechanism. It does not mean anything is there. I reached the ridge by 6:15 p.m. The light was fading fast now, the sky turning a bruised purple and charcoal gray. The lake below was a sheet of black glass, perfectly still. I worked quickly to set up camp. I cleared the ground of rocks and pine cones. I laid out the footprint. I pitched the tent, a big Agnes copper spur. The snap click of the aluminum poles assembling felt reassuringly mechanical. I staked down the rainfly, pulling the guy lines taut. A taut tent is a strong structure. By 7:00 p.m., it was fully dark. I fired up my jetboil stove. The whoosh of the blue flame was a comforting roar. I boiled 2 cups of water and poured them into a pouch of Mountain House beef stroganoff. I know people mock freeze-dried food, but when you re-cold and tired, that salty, chemical-laden sludge tastes like a Michelin star meal. I sat on a flat rock facing the lake, eating the rehydrated beef with a long-handled titanium spoon. The steam warmed my face. I wore my headlamp around my neck, casting a low beam of light onto my hands and the food. I was halfway through the meal when I smelled it. It was faint at first, riding on a sudden gust of wind coming up from the lake. Copper, wet pennies, and something underneath it, like spoiled milk. I stopped chewing. I sniffed the air again. Ozone? No, ozone is cleaner. This was muskier. Must be a carcass nearby, I muttered to myself. A deer, maybe. Winter kill. I finished my dinner quickly, the appetite suddenly gone. I cleaned the spoon, sealed the trash in a smell-proof op sack, and went to hang my bear bag. I found a sturdy branch about 100 yards from camp, standard safety protocol. I threw the line over, hoisted the food bag 15 feet into the air, and tied it off. Walking back to the tent, I swept the beam of my headlamp across the tree line. The white LED light cut a cone through the darkness, illuminating trunks, bushes, rocks. Then the light caught something. About 50 yards to my left, near a cluster of birch trees. A flash of color. Not earth tones. Blue. A bright, synthetic royal blue. Like a Walmart windbreaker. I froze, the light trembling slightly as my heart hammered a sudden rhythm against my ribs. Thump thump. Thump thump. I swung the light back to the spot. Nothing. Just the white bark of the birch trees and the black gaps between them. I stood there for a full minute, holding my breath. Is anyone there? I yelled. I have bear spray. Silence. I waited. Maybe it was a trail marker? A piece of trash? I took a few steps closer, the beam focused tight. There was nothing blue there. No plastic, no fabric. Just leaves and bark. Reflection, I told myself. Light hitting a wet birch leaf at the wrong angle. Or eye fatigue. You drove for 8 hours, Mark. You re-exhausted. Your cortisol is through the roof. I retreated to the tent. I unlaced my boots, leaving them in the vestibule. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipping it up to my chin. I lay there for a long time, listening to the wind pick up again, scratching the branches against the nylon rainfly. Scritch, scratch, scritch. I told myself I was safe. I was an engineer. I was in a structurally sound shelter in a designated wilderness area. But as I drifted off into a restless sleep, I could not shake the image of that flash of blue. It had not looked like trash. It had looked like a shoulder. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. I know the time because I checked my Garmin watch immediately. I did not wake up slowly. I woke up with a jolt, gasping, like I had been held underwater. The silence was back. The wind had died. The scratching branches had stopped. But there was a sound. Crunch. Slow. Deliberate. Heavy. Crunch. Footsteps. Not the frantic scurry of a squirrel or the heavy lumbering of a bear. Bipedal. Rhythmic. Someone was walking on the dry leaves just outside the perimeter of my campsite. I lay frozen, my hand moving inches at a time to the mesh pocket where I kept the bear spray. My fingers curled around the cold aluminum canister. Crunch. They were circling the tent. "Hello," I said. My voice was a croak. "This is a private campsite." The footsteps stopped instantly. I waited. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. A minute. Then, a voice. It did not come from where the footsteps had stopped. It sounded closer, like it was right up against the rainfly fabric. "Water," the voice said. It was not a question. It was not a demand. It was a statement of the word, devoid of inflection. The tone was flat, buzzing slightly, like a radio broadcast coming through bad reception. It sounded male but pitchless. I sat up, gripping the spray. "Who is that?" "Water," the voice repeated. Same tone, same volume, same lack of urgency. I have a filter," I stammered, my rational brain trying to negotiate. "If you need water, the lake is right there. Do you have a light?" "Water." The repetition set my teeth on edge. It was not that he was not understanding me. It was like he was just pressing play on a pre-recorded track. I turned on my headlamp. The sudden brightness inside the small tent was blinding. I shone it at the door of the tent. Through the thin, semi-translucent yellow nylon of the rainfly, I could see a silhouette. It was crouching, a human shape, head, shoulders, crouched on all fours like a frog, right in front of the vestibule zipper. "Back off," I shouted, flipping the safety off the bear spray. "I'm armed. I will spray you." The silhouette did not flinch. It did not move backward. It just stayed in that impossible, uncomfortable crouch. Then, slowly, glacially slowly, the hand reached out. I saw the shadow of fingers press against the fabric of the fly. They were long, too long. They pressed into the nylon, stretching it inward. "Thirsty," the voice said, but this time the voice did not match the mouth. The silhouette's head was still, but the sound seemed to come from above the tent. Ventriloquism? Acoustics? "I'm unzipping the door," I said, my voice trembling. "If you make a move, I fire." I needed to see. The not knowing was worse than the threat. I needed to assess the structural integrity of the situation. I needed data. I reached out with my left hand and grabbed the zipper of the inner mesh door. ZZZZZT. I pulled it down. Then the outer vestibule zipper. I took a breath. I ripped the zipper upward and shone the light directly into the face of the intruder. He was mundane. That was the shock. I expected a monster. I expected a meth head with sores on his face. What I saw was a man, maybe 30 years old. He was wearing a bright royal blue windbreaker, the one I'd seen earlier, and khaki cargo shorts. In 30-degree weather. He had no backpack, no light, no hat. His skin was pale, waxy, like he'd been submerged in water for days. But it was the face that broke my brain. It was smooth, too smooth, no pores, no stubble. And the eyes, they were wide open, unblinking. The irises were a flat, painted blue. The pupils were pinpricks, fixed, not reacting to the 300 lumens of LED light blasting directly into them. He was crouching in the dirt, his knees bent at an angle that should have torn his ligaments. "Water," he said. His lips moved, but the timing was off. The words started before his lips opened and ended after they closed. Like a dubbed movie. "Who are you?" I whispered. The bear spray felt heavy and useless in my hand. You use spray on an animal that feels pain. This thing looked like it would not feel a sledgehammer. He tilted his head. Not a natural tilt. It snapped to the side 90 degrees, ear to shoulder. Crack. A wet pop of cartilage echoed in the clearing. His expression did not change. The smile, if you could call it that, was just a slight upward curve of the muscles, but the eyes remained dead. "Mark," he said. My stomach dropped through the floor. "How do you know my name?" "Sarah left the doll," he said. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to ice. "What?" "Sarah left the doll. On the mantle. Blue eyes." He was not speaking to me. He was reciting. He was pulling data from somewhere. My head? My phone? Get out of here. I hissed. Go. The thing in the blue jacket stared for another 10 seconds. Then, without standing up, it began to move backward. It did not walk. It scuttled backward on its hands and feet, moving with the jerky, unnatural motion of a spider. It backed into the darkness, the reflective blue of the jacket fading until the black swallowed it. Thirsty, the voice floated back one last time, then silence. I did not zip the door. I could not look away from the darkness. I sat there, shivering uncontrollably, clutching the spray, listening to the nothingness. My mind scrambled for a lever to pull. Hallucination. Carbon monoxide poisoning from the stove? No, I used it outside. Psychotic break? Lexapro side effect? I needed to leave. Now. But as I reached for my boots in the vestibule, I saw it. Where the man had been crouching in the dirt. There were no footprints. The ground was soft, damp mud. My own boot prints from earlier were clearly visible, half an inch deep. But where a 180-pound man had been crouching on all fours, nothing. The mud was perfectly smooth, unbroken. He had not been standing on the ground. He was a projection. A hologram? No. I had seen the fabric of the tent stretch when he touched it. He had mass. I pulled my hand back as if the mud were radioactive. I zipped the tent. I zipped it all the way down. I locked the zippers together with a small carabiner I used for my keys. Pointless gesture. If that thing wanted in, a layer of nylon and a zipper would not stop it. I sat in the center of the tent, my back not touching the sides. And then the waiting began. The physics of a tent are simple. It is a micro-environment held together by tension. Aluminum alloy poles, DAC featherlight, creating an arch that supports a canopy of 20 denier ripstop nylon. It is designed to withstand wind, rain, and snow loads. It is not designed to keep out anything that wants to get in. It is a psychological barrier, not a physical one. I sat in the exact center of the floor plan. My knees were pulled to my chest. I had the canister of bear spray in my right hand and my heavy-duty Ka bar knife in my left. The knife was a gift from my father. 1095 Crow Van Steel. I stared at the blade in the red light of my headlamp. I had switched to the red filter to preserve night vision, though I knew it was really because the white light cast shadows that looked too much like fingers. 2:45 a.m. My Garmin Phoenix watched me. I glanced at the heart rate monitor. 118 BPM. I was sitting perfectly still, yet my heart was running a marathon. I forced myself to think about the bridge I was designing in Milwaukee. Cable-stayed design. Pylon height 300 feet. Concrete density 145 pounds per cubic foot. I tried to fill my brain with numbers, to crowd out the image of that man's face. The way his jaw had clicked. The way he knew about the doll. How did he know about the doll? Rational explanation. I mumbled in my sleep. I had been thinking about Sarah and the divorce during the drive. I must have been talking to myself at the trailhead, and he was listening. A stalker. Just a crazy guy in the woods who likes to mess with hikers. But that did not explain the lack of footprints. 3:12 a.m. The sound returned. It was not footsteps this time. It was a soft, wet slapping sound against the side of the tent. Like a wet towel hitting a wall. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It was circling. I turned my head, tracking the sound. It moved from the vestibule to the rear wall, then to the side. It was testing the perimeter, searching for a structural weakness. Then the scratching started. It was not aggressive. It was curious. Long, slow drags of a fingernail or something harder down the nylon rainfly. Zzzzzzzzzzzt. It sounded like a zipper opening, and my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise the bone. I flinched, raising the knife. But the zipper had not moved. It was just the sound of the fabric being stretched. "Mark!" the voice whispered. It was right at my ear, just inches away, separated only by the thin mesh of the inner tent and the nylon of the fly. "Mark," it said again, but the voice had changed. It was not the flat, robotic buzz anymore. It was Sarah's voice. It was not a perfect impression. It was too perfect. It sounded like a recording of her leaving a voicemail, spliced together with static. Mark. I left the doll. Open the door. It's cold. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. Tears pricked my eyes. Not from sadness, but from a primal chemical terror. You, not Sarah. I whispered, my voice trembling. Sarah is in Chicago. Chicago? The voice mimicked. Chicago. 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 It repeated the word over and over, speeding up, the syllables running together until it sounded like a machine gun. Chicago, 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 Chicago. Then it stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavier than before, pressed down on the tent poles. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears, a whoosh-whoosh sound that synced with the throbbing in my temples. I watched the wall of the tent. The moon must have broken through the clouds because the rainfly was suddenly illuminated from the outside. I saw the shadow. It was standing tall now, elongated. The proportions were wrong. The arms hung down past the knees. The neck was too long, bent at a sharp angle. It looked like a stick figure drawn by a disturbed child, projected onto the yellow nylon canvas. It leaned in, the shadow of a head pressed against the fabric. I saw the outline of a nose, a chin, and then the hands. They placed their palms against the tent. The fabric bulged inward. I could see the individual fingers splayed out. There were 6 fingers on the left hand, 4 on the right, and they were bending backward, the joints hyperextending against the resistance of the tent. I stopped breathing. I sat there, a statue of flesh and bone, waiting for the fabric to tear. I knew the tear strength of 20 denier nylon. That's about 15 pounds of force. A child could rip it. Let me in, the voice said. It was not Sarah anymore. It was not the man. It was me. It was my own voice. Let me in. Mark. I'm cold. The math does not add up. The load bearing is compromised. It was reciting phrases I used at work. It was digging through my vocabulary, pulling out safe words, trying to use them as a key to unlock the zipper. I did not scream. I did not attack. I did the only thing a prey animal can do when cornered by a predator it cannot understand. I curled into a ball. I pulled my sleeping bag up over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears. I lay there for hours. I could feel the pressure changes in the air as the thing moved around the tent. I could smell that scent again, spoiled milk and ozone, seeping through the mesh. I could feel the cold radiating from it, a chill that penetrated the 800 fill down of my sleeping bag. It did not attack. It did not tear the tent. It just waited, tapped on the poles. It dragged its fingers across the fabric. It whispered my name, my address, my social security number, the dates of my divorce. It listed them like a grocery list, devoid of meaning. It was studying me. It was harvesting data. I do not know when I passed out. It was not sleep. It was a biological shutdown. My brain simply could not process the fear anymore, so it pulled the breaker. I woke up to light, blinding, white, honest sunlight. I gasped, sitting up, thrashing in the sleeping bag, the knife still clutched in my numb hand. I slashed at the air before realizing I was alone. The silence was gone. A blue jay was screaming its head off in a nearby pine. The wind was rustling the leaves. Normal sounds. The sounds of a Tuesday morning on Earth. I checked my watch. 8:14 a.m. I unzipped the sleeping bag. My clothes were soaked in sweat, cold and clammy against my skin. The tent smelled like a locker room, acrid fierce sweat and stale breath. I looked at the tent walls. They were intact. No rips, no holes. I reached for the vestibule zipper. My hand shook so badly I missed the pull tab twice. Finally, I grabbed it and yanked it down. I pushed the fly open and scrambled out on my hands and knees, retching. I dry heaved into the bushes, my stomach spasming, expelling nothing but bile and acid. When I could finally stand, I looked at the campsite. The sun was shining on the lake. The water rippled peacefully. My bear bag was still hanging in the tree. My stove was sitting on the rock where I'd left it. It was a dream, I whispered. a night terror, stress-induced psychosis. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. Then I looked at the tent. The yellow rainfly was covered in a residue. It was not dew. It was a thick, viscous slime, clear but slightly iridescent, like the trail of a giant slug. It coated the fabric from the ground to the peak, swirling in patterns. I walked closer, careful not to touch it. The patterns were not random. They were geometric, perfect circles, spirals, and right above the door, where the head had pressed in, there was a perfect impression of a face molded into the slime. But it was not a human face. It was flat, featureless, except for 2 deep indentations where the eyes would be. And on the ground, I looked at the mud around the tent. Still no footprints. Not a single boot lug or barefoot impression. But the dirt was disturbed. It looked like it had been vibrated. The soil was loose and granular, like it had been subjected to intense sonic frequency. The leaves were pulverized into dust in a perfect circle around my tent. Nope, I said aloud. Nope, done. I did not pack. Not properly. I grabbed my sleeping bag and shoved it into the bottom of my pack, not bothering with the compression sack. I collapsed the tent, getting the slime on my hands. It felt freezing cold and numbed my skin like Novocaine, and shoved the sticky bundle into the mesh pocket of the bag. I left the stove. I left the bear bag hanging in the tree. I did not care about the $300 worth of food or the titanium cookware. I just wanted out. I hiked out in record time. I did not look at the scenery. I did not analyze the trees. I kept my head down, watching my boots, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. I had the sensation the whole time that I was being watched. Not from the bushes, but from the sky, or from the ground beneath me. I felt like an ant in a glass farm, scurrying toward the exit while a giant I pressed against the glass. I reached the truck at 10:30 a.m. I fumbled for the keys in the magnetic box under the bumper. I dropped them in the gravel. I snatched them up, unlocked the door, and threw my pack into the passenger seat. I jumped in and locked the doors. Thunk. That sound, the mechanical lock of a Ford F-150, was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up. The radio blared to life, still playing Pink Floyd, Welcome to the Machine. I turned it off. I reversed out of the spot, tires spinning in the gravel, and tore down the logging road. I did not breathe easy until I hit the pavement of County Road 16. I drove 80 miles per hour all the way to Duluth. I did not stop for gas until I was in Wisconsin. I stood at the pump, shivering in the midday sun, scrubbing my hands with the squeegee water, trying to get the feeling of that cold slime off my skin. It would not wash off. The numbness in my fingertips lasted for 3 weeks. I never told anyone. Not the police. Not my sister. Certainly not my doctor. What would I say? I was harassed by a mime in the woods who knew my divorce settlement details and defied gravity. They de-locked me up. I sold all my gear on eBay. The tent, the bag, the boots. I could not look at them. I took a loss on the price, just to get them out of my apartment. I went back to work. I focused on the Milwaukee Bridge project. I buried myself in load calculations and shear forces. I started sleeping with the lights on. I got a dog, a big German shepherd named Buster. I do not go anywhere without him. I thought I had successfully compartmentalized it. I thought I could file it away under unexplained neurological event. Then, 3 months later, I was sitting in the waiting room of my dentist's office. I picked up a copy of Outside magazine from the coffee table. It was an old issue from November. I flipped through it idly, looking at ads for expensive jackets I would never buy again. Then I saw the article. It was a small sidebar on page 42. The mystery of the Boundary Waters. Search suspended for missing hiker. I read the text. Authorities have called off the search for 28-year-old David K., a graphic designer from Minneapolis who went missing in the Sioux Hustler Trail area in late October. Search and rescue teams found his campsite undisturbed, but his gear was found in a strange condition. The tent was collapsed and covered in an unidentified biological residue. But the most baffling discovery was his journal. The last entry, dated October 24th, 2 days after he was scheduled to return, contained only one sentence, written over and over again for 20 pages. The math does not add up. The load bearing is compromised. I dropped the magazine. My hands were shaking. October 24th. I was there on October 21st. The voice. The thing outside my tent. It was not just pulling words from my head. It was cycling through a database. It was using the last words of the man it had taken before me. The math does not add up, I whispered, staring at the glossy page. The receptionist called my name. Mark, the doctor is ready for you. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I walked into the exam room, but all I could think about was the blue jacket, the glass eyes, and the terrified realization that when it was mimicking me, when it was saying, "Let me in, it's Mark," it was not just trying to trick me. It was practicing for the next hiker.